Hey everybody, welcome to Let's Write Scripts. I'm Micah Craddy. I'm the head of writing at Arc Studio, the best screenwriting app in the world. If you want to check out Arc Studio and learn how you can start writing your script for free there is a link in the description below. Today on Let's Write Scripts, we are going to be doing 3 writing sprints where you can work on your script. And in the breaks between the sprints, we're going to be chatting about screenwriting and answering your questions. So if you have screenwriting questions, you can drop them in the chat. And joining me for those discussions and the sprints is our special guest who's going to be here, Jamie Nash, who I'll bring on stage in just one moment. He's a screenwriter, an instructor, and the author of, among other books, the Save the Cat Beat Sheet Workbook. Before we get into it, I want to know, where are you? What are you writing today? Answer in the chat. And our discussion question to get our juices going today, our writerly juices, is where do you struggle when coming up with your story structure? So it could be maybe the biggest struggle you have, something that happens often, maybe something you're dealing with now, but just in general, where do you struggle when you're coming up with your story structure? So get in the chat, let us know where you are, what are you writing today, and where you struggle when coming up with your story structure. And I think that should be a question that our guest Jamie will be able to help us out with today. If you're watching on YouTube, please hit subscribe, turn notifications on. And if you like this video, give it a like. And of course, during the second break, I'm going to show the sandwich of the week, which I got to say, it's a monster this week. I'm really excited to show it to you guys. And now, without further ado, please welcome to the stage, Jamie Nash.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Quite an ovation. Yeah.
Jamie, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. So I think maybe we could just start with the first 2 questions. Where are you and what are you going to be writing today on Let's Write Scripts?
Yeah, I'm in Maryland. I'm in a place called Ellicott City, Maryland, which it sits kind of right between Baltimore and DC. That's where I live. And today I've been working on a script that's kind of a 4-quadrant. I don't even know if they still use the term 4-quadrant, really, but 4-quadrant fantasy film, I guess. It's kind of a comedy, fantasy comedy.
Okay, awesome. So 4-quadrant, for those who haven't heard it, is basically it's what, when they think it will appeal to men and women above and below 25. Is that the age, or what?
I think it used to be 30. But maybe it is 25. I don't know.
I feel like everything just gets younger and younger that they want to appeal to.
Yeah.
That's awesome. I'm in LA as usual, and I'm working on a pilot revision, and I'm just kind of getting to a scene I've been excited to write. It's kind of a husband's had been hiding something a little bit from his wife, and they're about to have a blow up, and so it's something I'm excited to get into today. But Jamie, I wanted to ask, kind of on the theme here of where people struggle with their story structure. In your work with Save the Cat, a lot of that has to do with structure. What is the most common thing, or one of the most common things you see writers struggling with when it comes to the structure of their scripts?
So there's so many ways I could answer this question, because I think the biggest issue is not having a story structure. So they literally don't have a break into 2 or a midpoint. A midpoint is often missing. So the story ends up being linear, or it ends up getting rushed. The ending feels rushed. And there's other ways, like when you read a script, that you diagnose these things. Like when you read a script, you don't say it's missing a break into 2. It's more like you're reading the script and you're like, what's the story about? And when it's missing those structural pieces, like the catalyst, like the break into 2, questions like that come to mind. Or even when you're reading past those points and you kind of understand what the story is, it just starts being the same thing over and over again, because it doesn't have the midpoint twist that raises the stakes, or the all is lost that raises the stakes even more and pushes you into the finale. So, it's kind of a weird question. Like, what's the hardest thing about story structure? Lack of story structure is often the biggest problem I see when I see scripts that completely lack it. And then the other, I'll give a second answer, because that's a lame answer. I think the hardest part, once you do understand story structure, and it doesn't seem like the hardest part, but I think the first 10 pages, the setup is the hardest part. And it's because you need to do so many things. You have to establish the character's ordinary world. You have to establish the main character's flaw. You have to show the things that need fixing in their life, like all the different things that are breaking down because of that flaw. And you have to do all of that in a way that's engaging, because some readers will only read the first 10 pages. And you have 10 pages to do all of that stuff. And oftentimes people have an opening of like the villain or the conflict, think like Jaws or something, so then you even lose 3 or 4 of your pages to that. So you have this very small space to do all this very important stuff. And also, in Save the Cat terms, the Save the Cat moment, or what I actually consider the rooting resume, the reason we're going to root for the hero. And all of that needs to happen in such a condensed space that I think it's one of the hardest parts to get right. And you're constantly rewriting it as you
Yeah. I mean, I agree with that. I mean, the competition just for that first 10 pages, the real estate there. And one thing I've noticed is I feel like oftentimes writers are trying to do the wrong things in those 10 pages, in the sense that they think we need to know the world building, where it's like, oh, we got to set up all the rules and what everything is and all this stuff. And really, a lot of that is stuff we can learn as we go. That's not important up front. We don't need that exposition dump. We need to get to know these characters, get on board with them, and start them on their journey. It is interesting. I like what you were saying earlier, where it's like, when you're reading a script, you're like, oh, you don't feel, oh, this is missing a break into 2. This is missing, you just, for me, it's like, yeah, we're just not going anywhere, or it's just like, oh, we're not, like, everything's just the same. There's nothing's changing, Like, I'm a big midpoint man. I love writing around a big everything changes moment, in like Parasite, has one of my favorite midpoints. We're just like, oh, we this world that we thought we were in is not then. And I think it's having those kind of moments are so important in writing an engaging script. I want to say hello to everyone from South Dakota, San Jose, Samoa, what's up? Chezi from San Jose, working on your novel. Well, you're welcome to be here. All writers are welcome. And a little hello for Jamie. Glad you're here. Rhonda, work on your film script. Barbara in LA, working on a rewrite for a script. The Canadians in the house, working on an animation series. Glad you're here. Zagreb, Croatia. I love it. From all over the world. This is fantastic. We have a great turnout today. Pamela's saying, I struggle with self-doubt and constantly start my story over or judge my story too much, then get stuck. I think that's interesting, because you were talking about the first 10 pages, how oftentimes you end up rewriting that. And I find myself doing that. And I find myself do it in 2 different ways. One that's valuable and one that's not. One where I feel like it's what Pamela's talking about, where I'm just kind of scared to move forward. And the other where I'm actually honing in on what it is and like crafting that opening. I feel like sometimes it can be hard to tell which one you're doing at times. Do you have any advice for like when you got that kind of beginning launched and it's time to move forward?
Yeah, well, I would say the way I write, I was a software engineer, so I was an iterative writer. I like to iterate. So what I tend to do is write a very fat, loose, very bad first 50, first 25, first 30. And I constantly then go back, but I always force myself to now with me, I use Save the Cat. So I say, get to the break into 2, then let's loop. And that's when I start finding the setup and payoffs, and I make it better. And I start realizing I can move that world building from here to there and stuff like that, because I have all the pieces laid out. So I'll do that for like the first 25, and then I'll go to 50 and I'll iterate through that a couple times, and not 20 times, but it might be like once or twice. Like I start from page 1 and I go through, and I keep slowly building like that. And for me, that tends to help.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Man, a lot of people in the chat today, a lot of enthusiasm. Juno, working on TV series script, struggle with structuring middles, which are always the most interesting part, but the hardest to get right, I think. I feel like there is something there about middles where it's like you understand how to begin a story and you understand that a story has to end. So those are sort of the most intuitive parts of the story. But in the middle, oftentimes people get lost a little bit in connecting those two parts.
Yep. And I think the advice I always give for middles, my advice is going to be obviously Save the Cat flavored. Sure. I'm a little different than Blake Snyder. I feel like Save the Cat is a strategy. There's many strategies you could use. I think it's a really valuable strategy. And so I'm going to give you that strategy. But what I usually talk about and save the cat for the middle is somewhere in your fun and games, which is Act 2, essentially. The beginning of Act 2 is your fun and games. Your hero has a goal and there are obstacles in the way. So one fun way, there's a bunch, like I have a list of all these different great middles, and there's like I have a list of about 20 different types of them. But the most common thing about them is usually if you can think of the first kind of big victory your hero has, but then twist it and then say it's not a victory, it's a false victory. And that's one strategy to help you get there. So they kind of reach a point where they're like, they haven't won the prize yet, but they're on the path and they're feeling good about themselves. And then you twist it. Or you do the opposite, which is they get to a point and they suffer a loss, but somehow that loss isn't a bad thing. It actually opens a new opportunity. And that's another way to get to it. So that's one way you can think of a midpoint. There are lots of others, like crossing the B story. One of my favorites, because I read a lot of horror movies, is the monster gets unleashed around page 50, around the middle. Like you think of Alien or something like that. Usually the monster is teased, and then on page 50, it's unleashed. It's all, it's totally out there and attacking or something like that. But there's a lot of different methods you could take. But if you try that false victory or false defeat, I think that's a good way to look at it.
I also love, I think it's interesting because middles are difficult, but I love writing them in the sense that oftentimes if it's an early draft, that's kind of when I find out what the story is that I'm actually turning, because it's what journey we're actually on. Like you can start with an exciting beginning and then you sort of get to the middle and you're like, okay, I have to dig deep now and figure out what this is. And then sometimes after that, it's like, okay, now I can go back to my beginning and start setting it up. But it's like, I need to get to the middle almost to figure out even what story it is that I'm telling.
I think you're absolutely right. When I'm outlining, like if you and I were brainstorming an idea and we were just at logline phase, usually the first cool thing I think of is the midpoint. I'm like, that's the midpoint. And every now and then the midpoint that I think of is actually the all is lost beat or vice versa. Sometimes I'm like, oh, that should be the all is lost or that should be the midpoint. But usually 9 times out of 10, that's the first beat I think of. Sometimes it's the catalyst, but it's like bit by a radioactive spider might be the first thing I think of because it's part of the log line,
Right.
But then the midpoint is usually the next thing I think of.
Yeah. That's awesome. All right. Well, we have a lot of questions in the chat that we can get to later, but we are here to write. So I think we are going to jump into the first writing sprint, the 15-minute writing sprint. Then we'll come back after that, chat more, answer more questions. Jamie's actually going to be doing a webinar coming up. So we're going to chat a little bit more about that and how you can RSVP for it. But for now, I'm going to play some music. I'm going to put the timer on the screen and we're going to get into our scripts. The first sprint is a 15-minute sprint. I like to think of this oftentimes as the warm-up sprint. Oftentimes you're reading back over whatever you were working on yesterday or last time you were writing, kind of getting into your creative flow. And I always keep very low stakes in the first writing sprint. Just like anything you can get done is fantastic. So play some music, 15 minutes on the clock, and we'll catch you guys on the other side. All right. That is the end of the first writing sprint, the 15-minute writing sprint. How would that go with you guys? For you guys, are the muses with us today? Are they blessing our fingers? Get in the chat and let me know. Jamie warned me about this. Sometimes when his screen switches, the picture freezes. But you're still there, Jamie?
I'm still here. Yeah.
Awesome. I'm glad you told me about that because you are frozen in a very pensive pose.
I must have been in the middle of a hard writing sprint problem.
Nice. How'd the sprint go for you?
It went good. I got about, I don't know. I'm doing that iteration thing. So I got through about 10 pages of iteration super quick. So it was really good.
That's good. It's always interesting, like to try to figure out how much you've written in a day when you're like doing rewriting, because it's like your script might actually be shorter than when you started. So it's like you've written negative pages, even though you've made progress on that. A couple more questions from the chat. I want to work in here. Michael had a great question here. I struggle with naturalizing important exposition, how to provide important context without spelling it out for the audience. Michael, I talked about this last week or 2 weeks ago. This is a great question. Well, I mean, there are a couple pointers I can say. One would be, don't have your characters saying things just for the audience. You know, if that is really easy to tell when it comes across in a script and it feels very forced, very unnatural. There are a couple of like tried and true tricks to this. One is like adding a new person, which is why in so many things there's this person whose first day on the job or something who doesn't know anything, and it's natural for them to be asking questions and needing to know this information because they are sort of the stand-in for the audience. They don't know. And also putting it in some sort of a conflict, like have someone disagree with that exposition or not understand it, or have some sort of opinion on it, so that it basically the scene becomes about something else other than just getting that information across. Jamie, do you have any thoughts on this?
No, you stole my big one. I call it weaponizing your exposition. So if you can have a fight over it, or they can use it as a weapon in some ways, like, let's say it's a backstory, like, and they say, you never let me go to camp or something, instead of saying, I never went to camp. It's just it turned it into a scene. There was a trick in the Friends writer's room. They used to say, every setup or every piece of exposition has to be a joke. And I've kind of always kept that to heart, is like every piece of exposition should be entertaining in some ways, or should be dramatic in some way.
Yeah, no, definitely. I agree with that. Tara's a question from LA. Working on a pilot outline, usually I find the idea of the twist and drive, but finding the how execution, like he has a debt he can't pay, now figuring it out, what is the debt? Oh, another great question. I mean, I would say I always go back to the character, right? Like he has a debt he can't repay. To figure out what that debt is, you have to sort of know the character. Like, what does that debt mean to them? Not only just like in their material world, like obviously they need the money for something, but like, what does the ability to repay that debt say about them? Like, what are their character flaws? What do they want in the world? You have someone who a single dad who's like struggling to pay child support, right? Like maybe it's not about the child support, it's about proving he's a father, or proving like his own self-worth, or being the example that he didn't have to his son. You tie it into their character circumstances and their personality, their flaws, their emotions, not just the plot. Jamie, what do you think?
Yeah, again, I love that answer. I could think of two things. One is if there's a sense of irony in whatever the detail you have. So, and I actually see irony as tension. So in a log line, like liar, liar is more interesting because it's a lawyer who always lies, and he can't lie. So if you can figure out how to add an extra bit of tension juice to your concept through the debt, that's what I would always lean into. And in absence of that, the other thing I would recommend is there something you personally know a lot about? If there, anything that comes from one of your worlds, something you research, something you're passionate about studying, or something you lived, I always try to lean into that as well.
I love that liar, liar example because, right, a person not being able to lie, sure, that would be a problem for anyone. But for someone who struggles with honesty, who's basically entire his career, his entire life is built. He lies to his son. He lies to his he lies to everyone. And so for them, that becomes a particular struggle versus, and it gives you much more interesting story and drama and conflict than just like an average person not being able to lie.
That's right.
That's awesome. Yeah. Let's work in a couple more here. Tozy's saying, struggling with third act. My story is an enemies to lovers, and I have a nice development up until they'll look at each other with tender eyes. But I feel that if I just jump to the happy ending there, it feels too soon. So enemies to lover, there's a nice development, and they're getting to look at each other, and you feel like it's just jumping to a happy ending too suddenly. Anything in that jump out at you, Jamie?
I'll take it back to character arcs and things in general. You have to seed in all the moments is basically it. So I always take these stories and try to then figure out what the beats of the mini story are. So maybe there's like maybe it's less beats, maybe it's 3 beats, maybe it's 6 beats, maybe it's 5 beats, but this story should have a beginning, middle, and end. I usually try to give it a midpoint. I usually try to give it a look in the mirror kind of moment or something like that. And then you seed those beats. So the problem usually is, it's not really a problem, but you have to find little places throughout the narrative that story, that side story kind of develops. If I understand the question right.
Yeah, that's awesome. Just checking in with the chat people. Good sprint for Pamela. Cash had a hard time a little bit, but started moving around the, I'm guessing that's 10-minute left mark. Yeah, it's a warm up, like it's not always going to be great. Kaya feeling nostalgic because you got to work on a screenplay you haven't worked on since summer. That's fun. I like when you working on a script feels like going back to an old friend. Because sometimes if it's a script I haven't worked on in a while, it means I put it away because I was struggling with it. So it can feel sometimes like I'm coming back to an old enemy instead of an old friend. Rhonda is going well. Awesome. I wanted to now mention Jamie's seminar that he has coming up here on February 15th and February 22nd. It's a 2-day seminar, right, Jamie? Do you want to share a little bit about what you're going to be doing here?
Yeah, sure thing. I'll give you the quick pitch here. And I promise I won't be frozen in that one. Actually, you'll watch me frozen the whole time. So it's a 2-day seminar. It's 2 Saturdays in a row. It's February 15th, February 22nd. And what it is, it's a deep dive into the beat sheet. So if you know the beat sheet, or even if you don't, if you know the Save the Cat beat sheet, I kind of have a character-driven approach to it. And I've basically expanded each of those beats to have several mini beats, which could almost be a book into itself. But instead of writing a book, which one day I might, I present this webinar. So this is perfect. Like if you're stuck on these beats, if you have trouble in the middle, if you have trouble with the setup, like I talked about, or any of those kind of things, or coming up with the beats, or why things might be going off the rails at times. This seminar really is all about that. It's kind of, it goes section by section, beat by beat, and kind of expands on the stuff that's already there to really help you figure out how to fill those beats out.
Awesome. And yeah, there is a link in the description of the video, and there's also a discount code there, ARC15 for 15% off if you want to use that. And again, that is 2 days, February 15th and February 22nd.
Right.
And if they can't attend live, there's a recording, right?
Yes, I forgot to mention that. Very important. If you can't attend live, you can always check out the recording. The only thing you'd get from the live is there is a Q&A at the end. There's like a half-hour Q&A at the end of every session.
Awesome. Let's do a couple, 2 more questions before we hop back into the second writing sprint, because I feel like people are really excited to have you here, Jamie, and they got a lot of structure questions that they want to throw at you here. Well, here's an easy one for you for Save the Cat. Is there a beat sheet for TV 1 hour?
So I wrote a book, Save the Cat Writes for TV, but I'll give you the gist of it. If you know Save the Cat, it's the same beat sheet, but here's what I found. I've written a lot of pilots. I studied a lot of pilots. I asked a lot of professionals, and here's how you use the beat sheet. It's all the same beats, use the same 15 beats, but you ignore anything about page count. And I mean anything about page count. You could have a 1-minute setup. You could have a 3-minute setup. You still go in order of all the beats. You still follow the order of the 15 beats. And here's the big one. Your show might end, your pilot might end at the break into 3. So the break into 3 is often a moment where all is lost happens, something horrible happens, but the hero gets renewed hope in the break into 3, and they come up with a new plan. In most pilots, that new plan is the show. That's the season. There's some mini arc that happens in the pilot, and they're like, I got a plan. I'm going to deal meth or something, or they're in trouble. Like, I'm dealing meth and I'm in trouble. I have to escape it. So either episode 2 or the whole season is actually that plan. So that's the big cheat sheet. If you don't want to buy my book, I just saved you some money. That's the big piece. There's a lot of other good stuff in the book, but
I'll just add something there that I think it's important, because as TV is my main métier. Oftentimes people will put like the inciting incident or the sort of like this new world at the end of a pilot, like a big twist.
Right.
And the problem with that is then your actual show starts in episode 2.
Yes.
And your pilot is sort of something that's different. So oftentimes you want to get that moment in the first half of your pilot, kind of as soon as you can get to it, because it's only after that moment, it's only, you mentioned the meth Walter White thing, right? It's only after his cancer diagnosis, and then he starts doing these things, that the actual show starts.
Yeah.
If the pilot doesn't end with him making that decision, we actually see him walking down this new road, and sort of, you can kind of think of the pilot, it's going to be a preview for your whole show. So you need to get to sort of like what the show is going to be.
Absolutely. And the biggest thing I hear from studio execs and things like that when they complain about new pilots is, hey, you see this thing that's your midpoint of your season? That should be the pilot or something like that. It's that much. In my book, I say what happens with me, I say arc out your season 1 using a quick 1-page save the cat beat sheet. And usually act 1 is the pilot. That's usually what happens. Not always, but sometimes in brainstorming, if you just mapped out your season 1 as kind of a movie and just didn't really think of episodes, usually act 1, it goes to the break into 2, is your pilot. And the debate section is the thing that gets blown up into a whole full-blown beat sheet. And that's what I find a lot of times.
That's interesting. One thing that just popped in my mind when you're talking about that, I had Tom Schnauz, the Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul writer that I worked with when I was the script coordinator on Better Call Saul. And he was saying that so often you just move things up. You think of something that's going to be episode 8 or whatever, and then that's episode 1. Like, and I think it's this important thing that oftentimes you'll think of something big, something cool, and you're like, oh, we're going to get to that eventually.
Yeah.
Move that up and trust that you're going to be able to come up with something even bigger.
Yeah.
Later. You got to trust yourself.
My thing is, there's a good chance that the pilot will be the only thing that ever gets read.
Yeah.
So if you have something really cool, you should probably put it in the pilot. You could change it after the show sells or something like that. But if you have something that's like so cool that changes everything, that just makes the whole show interesting, and you're not a person in a position to pitch, like you're really, your pilot is really your calling card, it's your resume, you're almost obligated to figure out how to bring things into your pilot to make them excited.
I'm struggling with that, actually, or not struggling with it, doing this right now. The pilot I'm working on, my reps gave me notes on it, and I had basically episode 2 was going to be this sort of thing. It was going to have this exciting thing in it. And they're like, no, that's the end of your pilot. You need to move that up into the pilot. And then I'm like, oh, right. And it's one of those things where, like, once someone tells it to you, you're like, that's so obvious. Why was I waiting for episode 2 for this? But that's kind of partly the rewrite I'm doing right now, is just sort of restructuring in order to build towards this moment that I was going to wait till episode 2 for. But like, I don't have an episode 2. I only have this one thing. So that's what I'm doing.
Good.
Fantastic. All right. Let us, oh man, there's something we could just keep talking this whole time, but I want to keep moving because I know we're here to write, and we'll do more questions in the next break. So this is going to be the bigger one, the 25-minute writing sprint. And then we'll chat some more, answer some more questions. I want to welcome everyone who's joined, like Ayana from LA, joined late. Glad you guys are all here. We've done one writing sprint. We've been talking with Jamie Nash from Save the Cat, who's going to going to be doing a webinar, and there's some information in the description about that if you missed us talking about that. But right now we are going to do some more writing, and then we're going to come back, chat more, and I will show, of course, the sandwich of the week, which, one of the things in structure you got to do is tease, build anticipation. So that reveal is going to be coming after the next, I guess we call it act break. But here we go, guys. 25 minutes on the clock. We'll catch you all on the other side. That was the wrong button. Sorry, guys. I was just like feeling the groove there. Sometimes the music was just still playing, and I'm like, let's just keep writing. All right, that was the end of our second writing sprint, a 25-minute writing sprint. How'd that go for everyone? Yeah. Did the muses show up? Did they abandon you? Jamie, that was pretty good for me. I wrote this scene that I was here to write. How was it for you?
Yeah. I actually hit the end of my iteration and started to write a new scene. So
Awesome.
I forged ahead.
Fantastic. A couple quick announcements before we move forward. If you want to join us on Monday, we also have another show. This is Let's Write Scripts. We have a show called Let's Write Books. And we do that Mondays at 10 a.m. Pacific. And we're going to be doing themed, and by we, I'm not implying Jamie's going to be there, but like we as in me and the audience there, but not. But we do have guests sometimes on Let's Write Books too. And we do kind of more themed writing sprints in Let's Write Books on a topic. And we're going to be doing sprints on Thursday about finding the best beginning for your novel. So if you're writing a novel or want to start one, I actually kind of started writing one in the process of doing this show, which has been really fun. So you can RSVP for that. There is a link in the description below. And of course, you can also RSVP for Let's Write Scripts next week, same time, same place. We'll be writing. It'll be a great time. I wanted to do a few more questions here. And then show the sandwich again, just teasing the sandwich. I'm like building it up. It could be a disappointment now. Now I feel like I built it up too much. I think this is a great question, kind of going a little bit from the structure macro level to the micro level. Because Nathan said, I was curious about the structure of individual scenes. I only realized recently that each scene has turns in the action, just like larger story chunks. Do you follow a 3-act structure in scenes? Nathan, this is a fantastic question. And my quick answer is yes. I don't necessarily think of it as 3 acts. I think of it as beginning, middle, and end, which is sort of the same thing as saying 3 acts. But I think of it in the sense that your scene is starting for a reason. Someone is trying to get something, and that's the middle, and it ends for a reason. And so, yes, everything is an arc. You're making big arc out of little arcs all the way. It's arcs all the way. It's turtles all the way down. So I would think it's really important that your scenes have a beginning, middle, and an end. They're motivated. Someone wants something. They try to get something, and they either succeed or fail. Not every scene, but most scenes, I think, can kind of fall into that kind of a pattern. Jamie, what do you have to think about the scene level structure?
The only thing I'd add to that, because I think you're dead on, is as soon as it's resolved, did they get it or didn't they get it? That's your cue to end the scene.
Yes.
So a lot of people go on and on with that scene and with other exposition and other stuff, but that's really how you know when you can edit your scene. As soon as that's decided in the audience's mind, move on to the next thing as soon as possible.
There's an adage that basically is like start late, end early. And that's kind of what that means, basically, that like start the scene as late as you can and end it as soon as you can. And that's what's going to kind of catapult you. And that should set up, in most cases, the next scene, because the result of that scene A kind of leads into scene B, right? The complication, whatever happened at the end of it, was going to motivate what happens next. And that's how you're driving your story forward from scene to scene. There was another question. We were talking about this earlier, so maybe we already answered this, but what are your thoughts on inciting incidents that happen 2/3 into the pilot? I have a hook opening, but in showing the day in the protagonist's life, it takes a while to demonstrate the life she lives. I would say that in a pilot, it's way more important to show the life she's going into than the life she leaves. Yes, you can show the everyday life to show that change, but really, as we were talking about earlier, your show is going to be what happens after she leaves. So you want to get to that as quick as possible. And you may find you don't need a lot of that setup that you have in your pilot. Would you agree with that, Jamie?
I generally would. Pilots, in my book, I say this a lot. I say pilots are wonky. And there are times when you can get away with this. I think it's a bad general strategy, but I'll give you one quick example. 2/3 might be really far into the pilot. That might be the problem you and I were talking about, where you're saving I'll call it the genre or the premise elements for the next episode.
The franchise on
the franchise you're saving for the next episode. But one example of this, like The Mandalorian, it does a thing where it has like a mini episode before the show really launches. Like if you watch the pilot episode. So it gives you a full-fledged mini James Bond kind of story before the story. And that story goes on for like 20 minutes. And that show's only 40 minutes long. So what it does, it reduces the pilot to like a 20-minute, story with this tacked on grabbing somebody from a bar, getting back to the spaceship and all that kind of stuff. So sometimes pilots are wonky that way, but in general, I'd say.
No, I think that's fantastic because there are pilots like Mad Men doesn't really have an inciting incident. Like the only really inciting incident really is the viewers change in their understanding of the world, but like Don Draper, his life doesn't actually change at all. So like you can do interesting things. These are all general rules. I also feel like with The Mandalorian, since that is playing with Western structure and that like established genre, it can sort of get away with things because you sort of understand what it's doing by leaning on those genre tropes of the Western. Another pilot question here. How do you feel about episodic shows? So I'm guessing you're kind of talking about like procedurals, kind of case of the week shows. In the pilot, are you focusing more on the character than story, given that you're expecting a new story in each episode? I would say the first off is that what you're trying to do is establish the pattern, basically. Like these shows, I mentioned the phrase the franchise earlier, and that's kind of what you have with like a Law and Order. And what you're trying to do is like, yes, have an engaging characters, because so much of the success of these kind of shows is having like a character ensemble that you care about. But really, you're kind of establishing a pattern that then is going to be repeated, episode after episode after episode, moving forward. Jamie, any advice for pilots for these kind of shows?
Yeah, I think you're right. The one piece of advice I give is absolutely, if it's a monster of the week, I call it blank of the week shows.
Yeah.
A lot of these are. You have to, first and foremost, it has to be one of those in an episodic. But secondly, what I found is a lot of the pilots make the first episode very personal. It's something thematic or personal, like the first case. And sometimes there's some new character arriving in a new situation, whether it's the hero first day on the job or the hero gets a partner first day on the job. And in the end, kind of the answer is, yeah, we can work together, or I can live here, or something like that. So there usually is just a little bit of movement in an episodic pilot. There's some new something. There's some little taste of new something in
funny.
most episodic pilots.
Because I just recently watched the first couple episodes of that new medical drama, The Pit.
I love it.
On Max. And they do both of those things. The personal thing where we're following one main doctor. And what makes this day different than any other day is that this is the anniversary of like the death of his mentor.
Very personal.
So it's a personal day. And two, it's a hospital show. So you're always having new med students, new interns, new residents. And so this is a couple of those people's first day. Yes. And so that kind of also helps with the exposition. It means they can meet everyone and that someone can be like, oh, watch out for so-and-so. They're this. And you're like, okay, we know about this character. It gives us an excuse to bring up all these expositional kind of things.
Yeah.
Other ways you'd have to try to like cram in.
Great example. Yeah. I love The Pit. I think The Pit's a great show. One that's truly episodic, Elsbeth, is another good example. If you want to check out Elsbeth, it's a very classic example. It's not super personal, but it's her first day on the job. She moves to New York City. We meet all the people. We get why she's there, but it still does a murder mystery in, an hour or whatever.
Yeah. I want to switch it up with this question from Evan, which is really interesting. Structure when there doesn't seem to be structure. Do you have any advice for a structure that's primarily stream of consciousness and reveals information non-chronologically and anything to avoid becoming too confusing to follow? Jamie, how do you create structure in a movie that seems to not follow any rules of structure?
This is not really my forte. Like I have a hard time helping out with this. It's funny because I do a podcast called Writers Blockbusters, and we just analyzed Mulholland Drive because David Lynch died. And the thing about Mulholland Drive is it actually follows a structure. It's very film noir. It just kind of goes off the rails and gives you a surprise in the back end. But I could imagine another David Lynch movie might not do this. The only thing I can say with something like this to organize non-chronological things. Sometimes, believe it or not, biopics are hard to structure because they're just usually you
It's a
find
whole life. How
yeah,
do
it's a
you
whole life.
summarize it? Yeah.
Usually you either land on using theme as some sort of, guidance to kind of lasso it in, or you find a framing device that does have a structure and put the other stuff within the framing device, meaning like let's say Social Network, it's like there's a trial and you can kind of jump around time frames and do kind of random stuff at random times. But it's tricky. I mean, it's a
Yeah,
trick.
but there's a central question kind of, and you bring the
Yes.
Social Network, which is like Mark Zuckerberg is being sued by his best friend, right? And it's a website about friendship, right? So you have that sort of central conflict guiding these things. This also kind of reminds me of like hangout shows, like Linklater kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
like another thing in one character is so important. Like you just have to have, for these kind of shows, you have to have characters that people want to watch because they're doing a lot of the heavy lifting. But two, like having an endpoint of something, like oftentimes hangout movies, will have like the big party or the something that there's some sort of thing that we're getting to, and to sort of tie everything else, and it sort of gives sense of anticipation. So if you can sort of build momentum at all, that can be really really helpful. Let's see if one more question maybe here from Barbara. Going back to the first 10 pages feature, what are some tips to introduce, tackle an ensemble cast of characters? So we talked about how important that real estate is. The first 10 pages of your script, it's really hard then if you're trying to introduce multiple people. How do you go about that, Jamie?
Wow, that's a tricky.
I'm just
hard
throwing
question.
the really hard ones to you.
I noticed.
Like, Jamie, what do you think?
All the ones like I have an answer for you. You nail those, and then you're like, wow, these are the hard ones. So it really, and this is a depends question because it depends what, is it Knives Out? Is it that kind of ensemble? And my take on ensemble is, I'll give you one piece of advice because there's so many different pieces of advice. Like think of something like Game of Thrones as all these characters and stuff like that. I think what it does a good job, I call it like handing the baton of POV. So you start with one character, you get in their POV, you realize, and then when they meet somebody, then you're free to jump to the other character's POV, and then you're free to jump to the other character's POV. And you can kind of build all the stories that way, as opposed to just jumping around randomly. It's one technique.
I'll add a couple others. This is the hard question. I'll take it on myself, Jamie. I'm not going to just
very good. Very good.
Two things I would say. One, we don't need to meet everyone all at once. We only need to meet them when we need to meet them. So it's fine to just meet a couple characters and then we meet the other characters when they need to appear in the story. So that's one thing. And a second thing, have them be doing something revealing about their character when we meet them. If it's just 10 people sitting in a room and they're just sitting there and we're meeting them all at once, and it's gonna be like, okay, this is so-and-so, this is so, like, that's gonna be really hard to do. But if we're meeting them, and I think Game of Thrones does this interesting where they're like, and some of these things that they're doing when we meet them, I don't think I can say on air, but like they're doing things often that like reveal about things about the characters as we do them. So have them be solving a problem or failing to solve a problem or accomplish a task or something like that in some sort of way that the manner in which they're doing it shows us kind of in a little nutshell who that character is.
Yeah, and that's true for all character introductions, even your hero. I call that story before the story. Like what's some story we jump into that we're just kind of in the middle of, that they're trying to achieve a goal, and it really isn't the main story. The main story will somehow interrupt it or something like that when it shows up.
Yeah. Julio asked this a couple times, so I'll bring this in here. What kind of villain sounds good for a trio of anti-heroines getting the chance to be an all-girl team away from their larger team? So in the bigger sense, it's your story, Julio. So whatever is the villain that you're attracted to. But I will say that oftentimes the thing for antagonists is just swap out villain for antagonist and be like, what do these characters want? And like, how can this villain stop them from getting it? Because oftentimes you'll be like, okay, there's some sort of plot or big thing, plot level thing that the villain's trying to do. And and the hero, the good guys are trying to stop them. But like, if you can make it deeper than that, that like the villain is some sort of challenge to the beliefs of these characters, to your heroes,
right,
then that's how you could get to someone that's more interesting.
the classic version of that is we're the same, you and I, right? So, and it works in most movies and shows. The hero and the villain are the same. The villain might be who the hero would end up being if they went down their path all the way without moral restrictions. Like they might be the opposite side of the spectrum of their arc, or they might take the arc too far or something like that. But there's some reflection of who the hero could be or who they could become if, they went down a certain path. And sometimes that's a good way to try to figure out your villain.
Definitely. All right, we are running out. I'm going to do 2 more quick ones, then show the sandwich, and then we'll do 1 more sprint. Maniro asked, is there a way to learn more about script writing without having to watch movies, TV shows? I mean, the best way is read scripts. Reading scripts is the best way to learn how to write scripts. And then, of course, you can read books about screenwriting. Jamie's written a couple of them himself, and there are a lot out there. But I always say, if you want to learn, if I'm reading a script, I can kind of tell if this person has read a lot of scripts or not, because there's just what scripts look like, the formatting, how they flow. The best teacher is imitation and then developing your own skills, I would say. And then Jamie, here, you can take this one. Okay. How do you feel about working on more than one script at a time? Can I write a pilot and a feature? Or do you recommend focusing on just one project?
So I've always been a multitasker. I'm usually writing things all the time, but usually the way it works, like I'll separate my time. Like in the morning, I'm most creative in the morning. So I kind of dump my creative bursts, like these sprints I do in the morning. And then at night, maybe I'm revising, maybe I'm writing an outline, maybe I'm doing something else. But usually I save my morning's very precious for me to do my dump, my muse, that kind of thing. So I'd suggest you find your time for that. And so my bigger suggestion there is I like to work on things at different stages. Like sometimes I'm working on a rewrite, sometimes I'm working on an outline, sometimes I'm working on a pitch. It's not like I'm going and doing page 10 of both things at once. That would be a little tricky for me.
Yeah. I think I would also add, it really depends on how much time you have. If you have a very busy life and you've got 45 minutes a day, then focus that 45 minutes on one project. If you have more time, then you can do it. I like, similar to Jamie, I like having kind of an A project and a B project. And if I'm waiting for notes on my A project, I kind of have a few days I can dive in to my other one. And I love what you said about having things at different stages, because it feels like you're exercising different parts of your brain. I'm not going to be like writing scenes necessarily in 2 things at once, because like that muscle's just too tired. But I can daydream about another project and sort of be brainstorming about it, or as I'm doing another thing. All right. First off, here we go really quick. I promised the sandwich, and here it is. Wanted for being delicious. This one is turkey 2 ways, turkey deli meat with turkey bacon on this beautiful black sesame bread, sun-dried tomatoes. We got greens. We got avocado in there, stone ground mustard, pickled onions. I mean, this was just like a beauty of a sandwich all the way around, I have to say. Jamie, are you a sandwich man?
I love a good that sandwich looks great. I'd love it. I love it.
Yeah, no, this one is like weird. Sometimes like they just get very tall, which helps photographically. So this one's coming in fantastic. All right, guys, we are going to do one last writing sprint. Just final reminders, announcement. If you want to take Jamie's seminar, there's a link in the class and there's a code ARC15 for a discount. You can also RSVP for next week's Let's Write Scripts, same time, same place right here. And on Monday, I'm hosting Let's Write Books. If you're writing novels, or like you just want another place to write, you don't have to write a novel there. It's 10 a.m. Pacific on Monday mornings, another time to write. It's fun. It's a good time. And there are more questions here. I'm sorry we can't get to all of them. But this has been fantastic. Jamie, I want to say thank you to you before we jump into the last sprint. This has been fantastic. And to everyone in the audience, if you have to leave during this next sprint, thank you so much for coming. We'll say final farewells on the other end. But Jamie, are you good to do a 15-minute sprint?
I sure am. I'm looking forward to it.
All right, here we do it. 15 minutes on the clock, just because we talk so much, which is fantastic. So much good stuff. And we'll say our final farewells on the other side. Here we go. I just want to keep writing. Oh, that was great. That is the end of our last writing sprint, and the end of Let's Write Scripts with our special guest, Jamie Nash from Save the Cat. Jamie, I want to thank you again so much for joining us. I think we had such a great discussion, a lot of great answers, and I want to thank the audience, for everyone, for asking such great questions and being so engaged and being so excited to come here and write together and make progress on our scripts. Something I look forward to every week. Such a great time. One final time, just to mention, Jamie is leading a two-part seminar on Save the Cat, a beat sheet deep dive. There is a link in the description below to register for that event, and there is a discount code if you use ARC15. Jamie, any final words you want to say before we head off?
No, I had a great time. Thanks, as you said, great questions. I'd love to see everybody at the webinar, and you can also check me out at jamienash.net. You can follow what I'm up to and things like that.
All right. Fantastic. All right, everyone. I hope to see you all next week at Let's Write Scripts and Let's Write Books on Monday. Links for those also in the description below. Until then, be kind to yourselves and happy writing. Farewell, everybody. Have great weeks.